Over the years, I've had conversations with Americans who lived in Argentina who told me, "I thought they spoke Spanish in Argentina, but they don't. They speak Castilian." I've met Chileans who recalled that when they were in elementary and high school, they weren't taught Español in language arts class, but Castellano. And I've heard many Americans refer to the Spanish spoken in Spain as Castilian Spanish. And then there was the time, years ago, when I stumbled into what seemed like an all-out war on an internet foreign language discussion forum. The battle? Whether the correct name for the Spanish language was Español or Castellano. Native Spanish speakers on that forum were at each other's throats over the question. Some of them were wishing each other death. I'm not kidding. The thread had to be locked by the moderators and the topic permanently banned from the forum. Clearly, this isn't just a minor terminology issue. The confusion is real, and people seem to care a lot about it. So let's try to clear it up. A quick note. Before we dive in, I want to clarify something. In this video, I'll sometimes use the English terms Spanish and Castilian, and at other times I'll use the Spanish terms Español and Castellano. Which term I use will depend on the context and what feels most natural in the moment. Just understand that for me, Spanish and Español mean exactly the same thing, and Castilian and Castellano mean exactly the same thing. Alright, now let's get into it. The Kingdom of Castile and its language. Before Spain unified under a single monarchy, the Iberian Peninsula was comprised of several independent entities, each with its own language. Throughout the Middle Ages, Galicia, Leon, Castile, Navarra, Aragon, and Catalonia were independent kingdoms, and each spoke a distinct variety of Iberian Romance. The dynastic union of Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon in 1469 brought together the two largest crowns. By the time the Catholic monarchs completed the Reconquest in 1492, Castilian was the primary language of administration and governance within the lands that would become the Spanish crown. 1492 wasn't just the year Castile and Aragon consolidated, it was also the year Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, taking Castilian across the Atlantic. As Spain expanded its influence and established colonies throughout the Americas, the language spread rapidly. But at that time it was still primarily called Castellano, because it was still largely identified as the language of Castile. As the Spanish Empire expanded and Spain established new territories in Latin America, the term Español became increasingly associated with the language of the growing empire. Over time, the external perception of the language as Spanish reinforced the adoption of Español as its primary designation, particularly as it became the common language of Spain's imperial territories. During the period of imperial expansion, Spain's various historical languages continued to be spoken within their respective regions, and the term Castellano remained in use to differentiate it from Spain's other regional languages. So both terms, Castellano and Español, have historical roots. One emphasizes the language's origin in Castile, and the other reflects its role as the national and global language of Spain and Latin America. But please understand that these terms refer to the same language. Why some countries prefer Castellano and others prefer Español. While Castellano and Español refer to the same language, different countries and regions have developed distinct preferences for one term over the other. These preferences are shaped by historical, political, and cultural factors, leading to variations in usage across the Spanish-speaking world. Latin America. Both Castellano and Español are used in Latin America, but their usage varies by country and context. Many nations use Castellano in formal contexts and Español in more common everyday speech. In Mexico, which was the viceroyalty of New Spain for 3 centuries, Español became the standard term in both official and informal settings. In Argentina, the opposite occurred. Castellano became the preferred term in all contexts after independence, as Argentina sought to assert its national identity and distance itself from Spanish colonial rule. Spain, a political and regional distinction. In some parts of Spain, the preference for Castellano is largely influenced by the country's multilingual landscape. With historical languages enjoying co-official status in their respective regions, Castellano is used to specify the language of Castile, distinguishing it from Spain's other languages. This usage is particularly relevant in regions with strong cultural and linguistic identities, such as Catalonia, where calling the language Español can be seen as reinforcing Spanish nationalism at the expense of regional autonomy. However, in parts of Spain where other regional languages are not spoken, Español is commonly used without political implications. Ultimately, whether a country or region prefers Castellano or Español is shaped by a combination of historical precedent, cultural identity, and political considerations. As I mentioned in the introduction, I once saw an online debate about Castellano versus Español spiral so out of control that moderators had to shut it down. The intensity of these arguments might seem surprising, but as we just discussed, they tap into deep historical and cultural tensions. So which term is correct? As we've seen, both are correct, but if you ever find yourself in this debate, don't underestimate how intense people can get. What is Castilian Spanish? One phrase we sometimes hear people use is Castilian Spanish, and that label can be confusing because it's used in different ways. So what does it actually mean? In historical linguistics, Castilian Spanish sometimes refers to the Romance dialect spoken in the Kingdom of Castile, the medieval ancestor of modern Spanish. In this sense, it refers to a stage of the evolution of the Spanish language corresponding to the period from approximately the 9th to the 15th centuries, when Castilian developed from a regional Romance variety into the dominant language of Spain. Nobody alive today, nor anyone who's lived for centuries, speaks this variety of Spanish. Today, Castilian Spanish may refer to the standard Spanish of Spain, particularly the variety spoken in central and north-central Spain, the regions that comprise the historical territories of Castile. This is the variety generally referenced in the standards for education, media, and formal speech in Spain. Some English speakers use Castilian Spanish as a catch-all term for all Spanish spoken in Spain, but that's not accurate. Spain has multiple regional varieties, and not all of them align with the features of standard Castilian. The Spanish spoken in Andalusia, for example, is Andalusian Spanish, not Castilian Spanish. I don't often use the term Castilian Spanish myself, because it can mean so many different things to different people. However, I understand it to refer either to the historical dialect of Castile or to the variety of Spanish spoken in north-central Spain today. I've heard people say lots of confused things related to the terms Castellano and Español over the years. If you've heard any of these sorts of things, please post about it in the comments. Argentines don't speak Spanish, they speak Castellano. Of course they speak Spanish, they just call it Castellano. My friend is from Málaga, Spain. He speaks Castilian Spanish. He speaks Andalusian Spanish, which is a variety of Peninsular Spanish. He would speak Castilian Spanish if he were from somewhere in Castile. I grew up in Chile, and when I was in school they didn't teach us Español in language arts class, they taught us Castellano. I understand that they called it Castellano, but that's the same thing as Español. Overheard in a Mexican bookstore that sold books in both Spanish and English. ¿Tienen ustedes libros en castellano? No, solo en inglés y español. I'm not sure whether the bookstore employee didn't hear what was asked or didn't understand what was meant. Of course, his response is funny because Castellano and Español mean the same thing. Request for native speakers of Spanish. I don't want to start a war in the comment section of this video about what the correct name for the language is. That's a pointless and nonsensical debate with no answer. But I would like to better understand how native Spanish speakers perceive the words Castellano and Español. For instance, if you're from Argentina and a stranger asks, ¿Habla usted español? What thoughts or feelings arise? What I really want to understand is the instinctive impression you get. Does it immediately signal that the speaker's from another country? Do you assume they might be a foreigner who learned Spanish elsewhere? I'd also like to understand how these terms are perceived in Spain, where the distinction between Español and Castellano can carry sociopolitical weight. Does Español feel like a neutral way to refer to the language, or does it suggest something about the speaker's place of origin, politics, or beliefs? In regions with strong linguistic identities such as Catalonia, the Basque Country, or Galicia, does the choice of Español over Castellano evoke any particular reaction? If you're from Mexico and hear someone refer to the language as Castellano, what impression does it give you? Does it sound unusual or overly formal? Would it make you think the speaker's from a different Spanish-speaking country? Would you think they're maybe referring to the Spanish of medieval Spain? Or if you're a native Spanish speaker from any other country, do the terms Castellano and Español carry any particular connotation, or are they interchangeable for you? Would hearing someone say one versus the other make you think they're from a specific country or socioeconomic background? Or is it simply a neutral alternative that doesn't stand out? I'd love to know if different Spanish-speaking countries associate these words with distinct meanings, or if their use is a matter of personal preference. I've done a bit of reading on the subject and I have some ideas, but I'd really like to hear from you, native Spanish speakers. In order to make this request perfectly clear to our native listeners, I'm going to deliver it in Spanish as well. Invitación a hablantes nativos de español. No quiero comenzar una guerra en la sección de comentarios de este video sobre cuál es el nombre correcto del idioma. Ese es un debate estéril y sin sentido, sin una respuesta definitiva. Me gustaría comprender mejor cómo los hablantes nativos de español perciben estos términos. Por ejemplo, si eres de Argentina y un desconocido te pregunta, ¿habla usted español? ¿Qué pensamientos o sentimientos te surgen? Lo que realmente quiero entender es la impresión instintiva que te da. ¿Te queda claro de inmediato que la persona es de otro país? ¿O te da la impresión de que podría ser un extranjero que aprendió español en otro lugar? También me interesa saber cómo se perciben estos términos en España, donde la distinción entre español y castellano puede tener un peso sociopolítico. ¿Consideras que español es un término neutral para el idioma? ¿O crees que su uso dice algo sobre el origen, la ideología o las creencias de quien lo emplea? En regiones con fuertes identidades lingüísticas como Cataluña, País Vasco o Galicia, ¿el uso de español en lugar de castellano evoca alguna reacción particular? Si eres de México y alguien dice castellano en vez de español, ¿qué impresión te da? ¿Te suena inusual o demasiado formal? ¿Pensarías que la persona es de otro país hispanohablante, quizás Argentina o España? ¿Sugiere una formación educativa o cultural específica o simplemente no te llama la atención? O si eres hablante nativo de español de cualquier otro país, ¿los términos castellano y español tienen alguna connotación particular o son intercambiables? ¿El hecho de que alguien use uno u otro te haría pensar que es de un país o grupo socioeconómico específico? ¿O simplemente son términos neutros que no llaman la atención en lo más mínimo? Me gustaría saber si en distintas regiones estos términos se asocian con significados diferentes o si su uso es solo una cuestión de preferencia personal. Así que, si eres hablante nativo de español, por favor, contribuye en los comentarios con tus puntos de vista, opiniones y perspectivas. Alright, this has been our discussion of Castellano versus Español. If you've enjoyed this video or learned something from it, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos.